Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Niitsitapi, Tsuut'ina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Oki Naganago Mekoche Stokomaki Dakotsunagotine Siku. It's wonderful to see everybody today. My name is Michelle. I use they, them, although right now it says she, her. Won't be offended if you said she, her. I use they, them pronouns, and I want to acknowledge that we're on Blackfoot territory. This land has been taken care by the Blackfoot since time immemorial. And then very recently in 1877, Treaty 7 was signed with the Crown, along with the Stoney Nakoda, the Dene from Tsuut'ina. And I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. And I'm really excited to have you all here today. As of 5 o'clock, I thought the author was going to be joining us, but she gave me an email and actually going to ask that we all pray for her health. She's not doing very well. She had a little like inhaling paint or something, and it really affected her. And I think if you've read the book, you read that that was an issue once before. So I'm like, wow, that's really incredible. So I hope she's okay. So just ask that you give her good thoughts and prayers. And I was super excited to tell her all about what I thought of the book. So, let's get started because we don't have as many folks today. I did get a message from another friend saying that because of the long weekend, their other organization, they're doing that meeting today. So, a few folks that we normally have, I guess, couldn't join us. But it is September, and I will say that even my family has a bunch of sickies, and so I feel bad for everybody because we all get back to school and work and routine, and just to get sick again, right? Just to infect each other. And I know we don't talk about it, but COVID is still here and present and on the rise. And so that's really problematic. I just recently had an old friend again try to downplay COVID. And I'm just like, you're talking to Fred Sasakamoos's niece that was killed by COVID in the first wave. Like you know that. So why do you keep trying to tell me COVID's no big deal? Like, and I had it and we didn't know like what was causing me to be so sick. And then I got it again. Like it is shocking to me how people try to downplay that. So I just wanted to kind of say that as I know you all are really on board with that and understand that. And I was saying to Kathy, the Reconciliation Action Group was considering having this like get together. And I just get so much anxiety about in-person meetings, and especially, in general, just because it's just, we're all going to get sick. And I don't have it in me anymore to put up with microaggressions. I don't have it in me to put up with other people's trauma. I have my own, and I don't know if I know a healthy enough person for me to be around, actually. Kathy and I were talking about, we try to, limiting our time around people with trauma. It's like, well, then I'd never see my community because I just don't know anyone healthy enough in my community that doesn't say things that are hurtful on a regular. And I'm just not in that mental health right now where I can put up with other people's like attacking. As you all know, someone accused me of being a pretend Indian, so I had to show all of that information and went through a whole podcast. And now my status is up for everyone to see because the rest of my so-called healthy community did not chime in and correct them or anything like that. So it was really painful, and I'm really struggling now with wanting to interact with folks. So anyway, that's where we're at. So it was really great to read this book, Unbroken, because I felt like finally someone wrote the book on what it was actually like to live through all of these horrible events that were happening that governments weren't taking seriously. They still don't, frankly, but they were happening and nobody seemed to understand. And I wanted to, I said to Angela via email, like I had a deep respect for her before for her coverage and her work that she had done. I really got the impression that she was experiencing a lot of racism at work, and that was, very evident in her book. But I have watched kind of a clique of the girls who were rejected from, mainstream media kind of exclude her. So I was gonna ask her about that because I really like a few of these, female media that were excluded, but at the same time, their exclusion of Angela, I know what that feels like. You're just never good enough even for the marginalized group, right? Because, well, your issues have no meaning here. I've been told that multiple times in the queer community and such, right? So, it was really good to sit, want to talk to her, but obviously she had a sickness come up, and I'm really worried about her because of what she wrote in her book here that I wasn't going to highlight until today. Well, until 5 minutes ago. She had some really great pieces in here. So one of my favorite was on 32, concealing my past with blazers and blush and decorative words, and the emotionless flair of a journalist forced all that pain down to a point where I'd forget it all that I had survived. I wanted to bring it up because I like through this entire book, she really interweaves how she could have been missing and murdered. And I did not know she was a youth that was at times homeless and living on the streets. So for me, knowing that now, and especially at the time that Robert Pickton was, at the height of his serial killing, like she would have been one of the easiest targets to go after as well. So, like, for her to talk about, putting on the blazers, the blush, and the decorative words, I feel like I've always done that. And then, when people say horrible things about that, about me being an apple or whatever, and that's fine. But I mean, ultimately, we're just trying to make it better for the next generation. And so, I just really had a lot of empathy for what she had to say there. Moving on, she talked about um the obviously throughout this entire thing, the police being, the majority of the issue and majority of the problem, along with media, with when talking about all of the people that were missing and murdered. It was the police again, the problem. And we had been telling and telling, we had reports and reports, but it meant a lot for her to go into the community and start talking to some of the family members and actually report it and have it be printed, because we would print it, but nobody would see it, right? Because we weren't the CBC. So, her talking to Brenda and how the police judged her for being a single parent and being Indigenous, that their child was not looked at with the same amount of vigor. Um, she said that if I wasn't working at the Friendship Center as the program director, we wouldn't have had any support at all. And I've seen that time and time and again where an Indigenous family would say, "Hey, our family member is missing or murdered," and there was absolutely no infrastructure whatsoever to help them because the colonial governments, the colonial nonprofits, the colonial people would never help us. And so that's so interwoven throughout here. And it was interesting because so like I'm moving forward to 36 here, page 36. And she was talking about 1994 and that summer. And that was the summer that I had graduated high school. And I had a friend in Smithers that I went to Sea Cadets with in the 90s, in 1990, and she got pregnant, so she had to leave. And I've always wondered what happened to her because she was another person that I knew that was half Native. Maybe she got her status. I don't know whatever happened to her. And I hope she's not one of these women that we read about. Um, Fast forward to 36. Missing white woman syndrome was said to be coined by Gwen Ifill, a Black journalist and author, is used to explain the media's fascination with missing women who are white, pretty, and from middle or upper class backgrounds. You know, I really remember that with the Saunders case out east. Loretta Saunders looked white. So at first, all of the national newspapers would print about her. And then it was found out that she was Inuk. And when she was part Inuk, they quit. They absolutely quit talking about her. And that wasn't until her body was found that they then started back with the colonial Indian narrative. But for a minute, she was, that white woman syndrome. So, was able to get a little bit of coverage. And that wasn't mentioned in this book because Angela does a wonderful job of just kind of focusing on the West Coast and the Highway of Tears throughout this, and which I'm grateful for, frankly. I really am really glad she did. And then she started talking on 50 about hitchhiking and how there were signs, don't hitchhike. And she says, shouldn't those signs say don't kill women instead? And I'm like, right? We're still there, right? Where there's no accountability for the fact that you just don't kill women. But, a lot could be said about that today out of all days. For some reason, I chose to not really highlight much more. I guess I just got caught reading in it. And, then she way over in 210 started talking about Tina Fontaine. And she made the point when Tina was found. I can't help but think, where was all that support, all that love, all that care, all that attention for her before she died? When we see an Indigenous girl struggling in the school system, on the streets, or in public spaces, what goes through our mind? Rarely do people help. A large part of the problem is the lack of resources available, including counseling and help setting it up and getting to support for parents who are struggling, including income support, housing, and counseling, adequate supportive housing for teens and young adults. But another part of the problem is the way public have been trained socially and psychologically to blame Indigenous girls and women for their struggles and deaths, rather than understanding the impact and depths of colonization. And I just think about that time, because at that time, Canadians still weren't getting it. I mean, arguably they don't now, but it really wasn't understood then by average people. And I just thought it was important because we're talking about community care a lot more now in 2024. And that was clearly missing in 2014, right? In some ways, in most ways, that's for sure. And then she started talking about the Winnipeg initiative to drag the red. And like, I was kind of offended when people were talking about community care recently, because to me, that was community care, right? Like dragging the red. And then she talked about how that got put together so well, to show like, it's not like from a lack of the community not trying, right? Community care was always there. It's just that it's a new fad for some folks. Whereas for us, we were always asking for help, always trying to get that help from folks, right? So, man, this cough is just kind of kicking my butt. I really loved the way she talked about how the journalists weren't getting it yet either, not just Canada, but the media. And she knew because she was in it. And so on page 228, the CBC leaders in Toronto didn't see it that way. Instead of a spiritual gift, so she was talking about when she did the coverage of the grandpa and granddaughter who went to open the bank account, the community wanted to thank her, so they gave her a gift. And as Indigenous people, we know the significance of honoring the work that other Indigenous people do, but white colonials, they don't fucking get it at all, right? So she says, as CBC leaders in Toronto didn't see it, Instead of a spiritual gift, they viewed it as a monetary transaction that could be seen by the public as a conflict of interest. For example, people might have seen it as a gift for me doing a positive rather than a balanced story on Maxwell Johnson and his granddaughter's experience. I was not able to put on my byline on the story about the ceremony, so a white male reporter who was not at the ceremony wrote a story largely relying on me for the information and visuals I gathered with his byline on it, because I was used to journals misunderstanding Indigenous peoples and cultures. I was not surprised. So just like to showcase how shitty the media training is on Indigenous people. I mean, ultimately, Daniel Smith is, allowed to go to the playoff games. Nobody's holding Jason Kenney accountable for the things he did, but Angela Sterritt can't get a gift from her community for properly reporting on Indigenous issues, unlike non-Indigenous people have been doing for over 150 years. I've been saying this, but to see this printed in black and white meant the world to me. And this is on 234. When I started this book in 2015, racism was a no-no to talk about in the journalism industry. In 2017, colonization was questioned in my stories. In 2019, journalists were not allowed to give the reality of genocide in Canada any weight. And then in 2021, all the rules began to break. And of course, that's from the 215 Voices from the Grave. And I really appreciated that because I've been trying to explain that to folks. And maybe people don't understand the gravity of how much the narrative has shifted in such a short time from TRC to today. And then something that I wanted to talk to Angela a little deeper about was, after that quote, she talks about some of the, changes in anti-Indigenous institutional racism, having that conversation, how she had to recognize that this was part of her path too. And she said, I needed to understand that patterns of violence I'd come to accept. And I feel like that's every Native. I feel like we accept way more violence than most people. And like, just as an example, opening up my TikTok today, getting some horrible messages, opening my Facebook to see another RCMP murdered, yet another one of our youth that was asking for help, not murder. These are things that we put up with every day that Canadians never seem to see. Like, I never will respect that. So when she said that, I was like every Native puts up with so much violence. And I know I'm so done with so-called microaggressions, so-called, other trauma, other people's trauma. Like I don't have it in me anymore. Hats off to earlier Michelle, but this Michelle, I don't have it in me anymore. I don't know if I could support folks much anymore because of the amount of dirt that I just have been kicked in the face with over and over and over again. I just need to focus on me now, unfortunately. So this is my only way I can give back now, is very limited time with folks. She says, this just broke my heart. I cried for like 20 minutes. She does the letter to her son. And I really wanted to talk to her deeper about all of this because this week is Sam's last grade school. So it's a lot of first, last. So like, it's the first day of school for the last time. It's the picture day for the last time, right? So it's a lot of that for us. And, reflecting a lot about the pressure, the amount of pressure that they're under right now for, pick a profession, get good grades, have a graduation, don't drink and do drugs and do stupid shit. And, like they're under a lot of pressure right now. We've all experienced that. But it's a little different too for Indigenous people for different reasons. And so, when Angela was writing this I wanted to read this. How do I tell you that when you grow, you might not be liked as much because you're not white, and that your best friend is in the same boat because he is black? And I did not get that growing up, and it has affected me negatively because I didn't have someone in my life talking about what racism is, what it isn't, what's institutional racism, what isn't, what's gendered violence, all of these things. And so I know it's hard as parents to navigate that and to not, you know, traumatize them. But at the same time, I feel like with my daughter, I've been lucky enough to break a million cycles. And one of them was this, where, you know, they are very aware of what systemic misogyny, gendered violence, and racism is. And as a result, yeah, they may have a lot more anxiety. So that makes it's really hard. And I really got that from her in writing this book. Like, uh, right now, I don't want to burden you with details on how many of your people, your family, have been abused and brutalized, or how mommy was homeless when she was a little girl and was almost beaten to death. There are things I might not never tell you because I don't want to normalize these things for you. And that's the hardest part. And kind of goes back to her last quote about the everyday violence that Indigenous people put up with. So I really cried. It meant a lot to have her read this because I think as parents we struggle with that. And as Indigenous parents, we struggle with our Indigenous children telling them that. I know most of Canada doesn't give a shit and won't do anything about racism in the schools, but you know, we have to arm our children to know. Um, at 11 years old, my son, you know more than many non-Indigenous people over 25. I'm like, yep, my daughter will always know more, and unfortunately too. Loving yourself, my dear son, is an act of colonization and resistance. And again, kind of back to what I was saying, I don't have it in me anymore to try to do extra for a community that where we all need to be working on what loving ourselves means and understanding that. And I thought I was doing a really good job of that, but um I know I have less than 20 years until, I die, and I don't want to spend the rest of my 20 years getting kicked in the face by people. So for me, I really felt like this encapsulated a lot of that violence that we experience daily, whether we're experiencing it by our so-called friend group, by our so-called community, by our so-called work, whatever that looks like. And on top of that, documenting the families and their experiences, like, this was really important, and I really had hoped that the inquiry would do that. I loved her talking about the failings of the inquiry. I liked her talking about the failings of, the Opal report. It's important for these things to be written down somewhere because so many Canadians will never know, and I frankly don't believe they'll ever care. So, for me, this was a really wonderful book. I was rereading in the back some of the things that were said by some of the authors that she had given them to, all amazing people that I respect deeply. But Daryl McLeod had just recently passed away, and so for her to have him say a new, clear, compelling, and urgent voice illuminates a critical topic of our times with the passion and profound caring of a devoted sister, a tour de force. And so I just want to honor Daryl McLeod. We did Mama Sketch at the beginning of the book club years ago. And, you know, it's hard watching our authors pass, but I guess it happens. That's for sure. So I love this book. I will recommend it, especially to the folks who refuse to lift a finger on the national inquiry. Maybe this book will, at the minimum, give them an idea since they are incapable of reading the national inquiry, and going from there. So Really love that book, and Kathy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Hi, everybody. Um, I just basically started reading the book today, and I only got to like page 188, so I never got to quite finish it. Um, it was really interesting. There was a lot of things there that kind of like I wish my eyes were a little more open, like because when she talks about all the things that happened in Rupert and the Highway of Tears, like I was living in Rupert in 2015, like um oh no, not in 2015. I was living in it from 2003 to 2006. So I mean, there was a lot of stuff I remember being taking part in the Sisters in Spirit and and for such a small town, it was such a big march. Like I couldn't believe how big it was, and that's really was one of the first things that really opened my mind and my eyes about Indigenous causes. You know, it was just like seeing this sea of people in this little town. Um, that was just before I moved back to moved to Calgary, back to Alberta. But yeah, no, I just found the book was really interesting. There was a lot of stuff that was hard to read in it for me. Like, you know, I'm just found it really hard. But I found one thing I found really interesting, and it makes me like my mind will pick at it until I can figure out ways to think about it more, was on page 135, where she talks about feeling alienated from the largely non-indigenous population on campus and blah blah blah. But at the end it says another white professor, along with the entire class, refused to believe that Indigenous peoples were not conquered at the time of colonization. I don't know why that just is like, to me it's just like, wow, you know, like I know we were subdued. It just makes me want to like investigate this more, that whole thought of not being conquered and getting a better grip on understanding that, because to me it just like jumped out and I'm like, wow, I've never really thought of that before. Like I've never thought of it that way. And I can't imagine standing up to your professor and your whole class and defending your views. Like I just like, wow, that's pretty strong. And I just like, yeah, I really like that sentence, that, and I really need to think about that some. Um Other than that, like I don't like I sped read today, so I didn't really get much chance to take any kind of notes or anything. It was just like, let's get through as much of this book as I can today. So that's all I really have to talk about. Thanks.
Thanks, Kat, and then Wendy.
Thank you. Um, First of all, Michelle, I'm here for you anytime you need. You know how I feel about you. And I'm sorry you're going through what you're going through now. And I think it's important for you to take care of yourself. So whatever you need to do, I'm with you. Thank you for choosing this book. Um, it was a tough read, as you both have said, and Angela warned us at the beginning that it would be, so I appreciated that. And seeing all the names of the women that she knew about, that just set the tone of the whole thing, basically. And you had to hold those names, carrying it throughout the whole book. It was, yeah, she's an amazing writer, and I really appreciated how much work she has put into this book and her career and telling stories for the families and for the people who were murdered. I would have asked her where she finds her joy, and I'm sure maybe it would be in her son, with that beautiful letter she wrote at the end. So yeah, that's all I have to say for the moment.
Hey, would you like to chime in? Thanks, Kat.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks, Michelle, for choosing this book. And thanks for sharing with us how Angela's doing today. Definitely been thinking about her through our conversation. And thought about her a lot just in reading the book. She brought, excuse me, she put a lot of herself into this writing. And so I felt like you got to know her as well as every single person she wrote about. I think that was really the beauty of her writing for me, was just her storytelling. It has a lot of heart in it, a lot of compassion and empathy, but really what I also thought was really skilled was the way that she named all the problems, named the issues. Like, she was not pulling any punches on how things were. But she didn't dwell there. Like, she would just kind of name these things as realities. But what came through and what she put so much into was making sure those human stories were at the forefront. So it's very well written in that sense of, it did remind me in some ways of the MMIWG report, in the sense that when we read through that, also noticed that the stories were centered, that the experiences of people were centered. But this was almost like kind of peeking behind the curtain of like all the pieces that were in motion leading into that and through that and beyond that, which just made the whole experience deepen for me. It made me want to go back and re-look at parts of the report in new ways. I think that would be something that I was thinking about as I was reading it. And I also just want to say how, this book is one I'm reading alongside the other one you recommended to me at our not last book club before, Michelle, the Clearing the Plains book, which is taking me quite some time to get through. But having gotten, several chapters into Clearing the Plains, and then trying to keep up with this book club, so then reading this one a little bit faster, I think what is sitting with me a lot as a white settler, as a person who has a long ways to go in deepening my understanding, and also recognizing there will be pieces I'll never understand. Like, there will be pieces that will never be my perspective. It's really the span of time that we're talking about. That talking about these issues are not one moment in time. They are generation after generation after generation, and kind of the unraveling of all of that through, for me right now, it's these two books together are just kind of leaving me with a lot. I sit with those thoughts quite a lot. Um and then I reflect on who we are today. Like, we go through our someone said, I don't know, I probably read it somewhere, the days are long, but the years are short. Like, if you look kind of at time and you think about that, it's helping me with that feeling of like, oh, these problems are so big, no one can make a difference. I think books like this help you realize the human pieces that you're thinking about every day are making a difference. Like the little things that everybody can be doing, the everyday moments, the long, difficult journey that every person is going through, but then just go through it then. Like, not just sitting in the hardness of that alone, but also just finding a way forward that is sharing something of good and of use to others. So I didn't make a lot of notes. I did a lot of earmarking pages and just kind of sitting with her stories and the pieces she wanted to get through there. I think, what others were saying today, what it got me thinking about, and thank you, Michelle, for just openly, directly sharing with us kind of how you're feeling and the journey that you're on. I do think um, it made me think a lot about what several others have said today, just like where are our white settler Canadians in their understanding of this. What is it? What is the limits? Why are people feeling that this is not for them to understand? I don't have the answers to that directly, but I guess that's why I'm explaining those other pieces of the books that I'm reading. And what motivates me to read them is really, I do very much value the context of history and what is helping me in my day-to-day life. And so I feel like, if people sit only in these are terrible stories, these are terrible things that happened and continue to happen. I feel like people who are just seeing them as a terrible story, don't want to put the energy into thinking about that. And I think I'm hoping, maybe people in conversations like ours today, in listening to the conversation we're having today, can think a little bit beyond just like there's more to be taken from the story than that terrible things happen. And I feel like that is certainly what I am taking away from her writing. I haven't had a chance to listen to the podcast that she does, but reading her book makes me want to just hear more of her content. And I really appreciate, Michelle, what you said about, the ways that she would talk about her experiences within the media community and the layers of that. I think it just reminded me of how easy it is for us to all make a judgment call on what we see about someone else's workplace life, and make assumptions about who somebody is or stereotype them into buckets. And um, yeah, it just made me think about that quite a lot. So anyway, I'm just kind of rambling now, but I think the last thing I wanted to say was something you said just a few minutes ago, Michelle. I wrote it down as a quote from you because I think it is actually at the heart of the answer to that whole, like, people need to care enough to read stories about other people's perspectives and lives, which was, we all need to work on what loving yourself means. Like, that's really deep and impactful for you to say that. So thank you for saying that. I do think it is a personal journey for everybody to go on. People who haven't tried that journey or thought about it very much, it sounds very platitude like, but it is totally real. And it's absolutely what keeps me going in a frustrated moment is like, training yourself not to listen to the voice that is crushing yourself and asking yourself, like, where's that coming from and what is real here? Like, those things that we say that are not loving ourselves are not helping us, and they're real feelings, but they're not actually what's going to make change. So what a wonderful, powerful book. Thank you so much for choosing it.
Oh, for sure. And those weren't my quotes. They were hers at the end about self-love and such. Like, she is a force. And I invite you all to unmute yourself so that we can, like, just openly discuss it, because there's not that many folks who came tonight. I think too, like, I have a deep-seated anger right now happening because it's Reconciliation Month. A lot of people are going to be wearing an orange shirt in a few days, and thinking that's enough, that's good, when we don't have all 94 calls to action implemented, let alone the 231 calls to justice that need to be implemented from the national inquiry. And so I find it incredible how, people will wear an orange shirt one day and say, oh my God, every child matters. But then I was just, I see the hypocrisy in every single day stories from one day to another. You can't say to me, Orange Shirt Day, every child matters, while our youth are trying to access mental health and getting murdered by the police. Like, you can't. Like, it's just incredible to me. And I tell how I've screamed on top of the rooftops for 10 years. We can't have cops and police in the schools because they murder our children. And yet you have the average Canadian that is, like, on top of this, soapbox saying, yes, we need them, and your people are this, and your people are that, and your people, and so, it's magic how all the Canadians cannot see when people say horrible things like that to me, and I have to like literally make a TikTok showcasing, here are the craptastic things people say to me. That's why you can't comment anymore, you know, and people still are like, well, she's such a bitch for not that, and I'm like, so I get so much ugly violence because people refuse to do the work. And me advocating for 231 calls to justice is seen as annoying, and you're whining, and it's like, what? Like, nobody says that to the victims that were murdered by, I don't know, in 9/11, you know, like no one says that. No one says that to veterans, but they say that to natives like that. They don't think twice about it, right? And so I'm always shocked at how it just gets missed by all of these so-called people who have done anti-racism training and Black Lives Matter now, and we care about oppression dynamics. And it's like, no, you don't. You know, half of the queer community, every pride I get like upset, like I'm physically angry because they refuse to talk about the 231 calls to justice, and they refuse to include the two in their acronym, you know? So I just get like, I just don't want to deal with them. I don't want to help anybody anymore, because it's like, it's not from a lack of us telling you what the solutions are. It's not. Just like in the 90s when the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples came out and there was over 400 recommendations. It's not from a lack of us telling. It's from a lack of listening and a lack of action, you know, and people think wearing an orange shirt is action. It's not. Like, that's nothing. There's so much work to do, and people won't do it. And so I don't know what more to do. I think I just know empathy, apathy. Those are the two issues here, and Canadians are committed to hate. So there's not much more I can do, right? Like, we need settlers to do more. And as for natives, like, shouldn't even have to be talking about this. I should be paid to learn my language. That's where we should be, right? And we're not. And you know, and I just keep retweeting how crappy people's land acknowledgements are, because they don't understand what they're saying when they say the words. They don't know what it means. You know, they don't have Indigenous voices at their tables, at their committees. You know, they don't pay Indigenous people despite claiming to understand economic oppression. So, and I just think this book encapsulates why women are missing and murdered. You know, we're the ones who have to deal with the brunt of it. We are. So I'm grateful she wrote it. I'm grateful she talks about it so openly throughout the entire bit of it, not just her personal stories, but everyone's stories. You know, it's wonderful. So, and I hope like one day that somebody will write what happened here in Calgary, but those aren't my stories to tell. So, you know what, unfortunately a lot of that's probably gonna be gone. And like, kind of back to your point, Wendy, about clearing the plains, like, if in a decade we've seen this amount, in the decade before we've seen that amount, and the decade, you know, like, we're talking about so many things that you see over and over and over again. It's just not being addressed, all purposefully, of course. Can't even rename John A. MacDonald.
Yeah, like that book definitely, I'm only about a third of the way through, but it's already hitting me that when we talk about disease coming in and being kind of an intersecting, confounding piece, it wasn't like my initial impression of that years ago when I heard about, you know, at Contact there would be lots of disease. I thought about a singular event, and the book really plays out like
Well,
the
warfare.
waves of many events many complex different ways that it spread, many, you know, different impacts depending on the lifestyle and the trading practices, and just like it's so deeply well laid out to help me imagine time in a more realistic way. And it's, I mean, it's not unrelated to what you were saying about COVID. Like I am sure we will talk about that at some point as a very singular event. But we're talking about years of time, waves of impact, differentiating impact. Yeah.
Yep. We're year 4 of this now. It's incredible to me.
Yeah.
Kat and Kathy, would you like to chime in at all, or should we wrap up?
I have a really like to heard more about the moose chasing her up the trail at the Prince George Northern BC University. That would have been hilarious if she would have elaborated on that, because I remember when I was in Prince Rupert delivering mail, the first spring they said, don't get between an elk and the babies, or rutting season, they said, don't get between the elk and the females. They basically said, if you see elk, don't go there. And I was like, I remember almost getting chased. Like, he started to come at me, but I quickly turned around and left. It was just a cul-de-sac. So I was just like thinking, yeah, that could have been me too, but I wouldn't have been able to run with 30 pounds of mail on my back, right? And yeah, and the only other comment I have to say is, like, when we're talking about COVID, and that I was just like, as far as the long COVID, like, have they done anything for you to help you? Because you were part of the long COVID. Was it a research project, or? Yeah, so did they give you any supports?
Well, like from that, it was really some things that they've known. All we really do is share, studies that have come out. But the truth is, Kathy, the average doctor, like my family doctor, doesn't know, care, have time to research any of that. And so, like, we're struggling with our relationship, and I am privileged to have a family doctor, so I don't know what the right answer there is, other than, you just have to manage it yourself the best you can. And so, and now I have like ADHD, and understanding that and seeing how it is very related to hormones as well. And our doctors, of course, don't have much for research or resources for menopause and menopause in general, because, typically everything's done on men. So, and it's been really hard. And then I just watched, I'm sure it was a commercial, but it tried to be a testimonial about Ozempic helping with your mental health too, and fatigue. And I'm like, that's really coincidental in a time of COVID and long COVID. So yeah, I found that very interesting. But it is what it is. Like, I don't believe the medical system is here for us, but I did recently share they are supposedly going to be doing some sort of shitty apology to us as Indigenous people. Like, this is what I mean about meaningful reconciliation. Like, we've never had the police really apologize to us, or
for sending body bags?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, like, the Canadian Medical Association was run by an Indigenous man for a while. And so he's really helped them with what reconciliation means. But like, the Reconciliation Action Group and we've been really advocating for, our treaty right to health, because I recently met Dr. Jane Philpott, and I used to like campaign for her even when she wasn't a Liberal. And here she had these two major portfolios, both health as well as Indigenous, and she's still not advocating for our treaty right to health. And I thought, for out of anyone in the entire country, it would be her, but it's not. So it's back to us as Indigenous people to advocate for ourselves. And, the Reconciliation Action Group, slowly doing the things that need to be advocated for, because the truth is, people, like, they attack me and say horrible things, but when the Reconciliation Action Group says it, then it's somewhat more respected and understood. So yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to say thank you to Wendy for reading that book. I read it quite a few years ago, and it is a hard book to slog through. Took me forever. I just kept picking away at it. And it is a very informative book, and I think every Canadian needs to read that book. So that's kudos to you, Wendy.
Like, that gives me energy to keep going, Kathy. Thank you. It is definitely going to take me a while, but I'll get there.
Yeah, it's a tough one. That one and Lost Harvests. That one and The Importance of Monogamy. Those are the three, like, they're hard books to read, but I think they should be required
Or No
reading.
Surrender by is it Malloy?
I haven't read that one.
Oh, that one's a pretty good one too. I read it the same time as Clearing the Plains, or right after. It's pretty good. It talks all about the treaties and how they weren't officially surrendered. So
See, so you do know, though, about, not being conquered, because, like, the treaties were about that, right? Like, about living side by side, not being conquered.
yeah, but it's just, we were subdued to the point that, well, you might as well say we were conquered. Like, I mean, there's enough spirit to continue living, but yeah, it was pretty freaking bleak. That's all I can say. They did a pretty good job. If they didn't conquer us, they did a pretty good job of beating us down. That's for sure. And stealing the land, because their understanding and our understandings were worlds apart when the treaties were signed. And there was so much lying and subterfuge, like little agreements that disappeared on the way to Ottawa to be filed. Like they would say on the ground, they would make these little side agreements, amendments to the treaties, but they would just like disappear on the way to Ottawa to be officially filed, right? So they did a really good job of lying and stealing the land. Yeah.
And I do have Clearing the Plains, haven't started it yet, but 2 book clubs, people. It's really hard to slip another one in there, but
I like that book so much. I actually bought a hard copy. I saw it at the bookstore, Ferris Fair. So I have a hard copy for me, and I have a paperback copy that anybody can borrow if they want it. So that's how important I think that book is.
Yeah, no, I think it's critical reading too. I feel that way. And I am always shocked to how people, like, don't understand, right? How it was made, how this world was created, and the story that you're told in grade 4 in your grade 4 textbooks is not close to reality, right? That's why in my podcast I always say the lies taught in schools every single day nationally, because these kids aren't being told the truth at all. And the teachers, they're not willing to go there because of their white fragility. So yeah. All right, folks. So it was wonderful having you. I'm really grateful. I did Google. There were some wonderful existing videos of Angela being interviewed for this book. So, like, if you wanted to have a look at those, I would highly recommend them. And then if you find them, you can, like, hit 2 speed for some of the interviewers and such. And yeah, I hope you really enjoyed the book as much as I do. I'm probably going to start encouraging people to read that over the MMIW inquiry report, because unfortunately, it's like asking your kid to clean their room and knowing if you're lucky enough to get your, laundry together, that's got to be good enough. And it's really pathetic on the side of settlers and treaty partners that they can't do the work, but maybe this book will help them, at least be willing to flip through it a bit here or there. So, and immediately I got online. Well, it should be on audio, Michelle, from a settler who said that to me, as if it's my fault and responsibility to get the national inquiry on an audiobook. And the amount of times people say that to me, and I had this person previously blocked, I tried to be respectful and unblock her again, and I'm like sitting here looping and looping and looping. Like, I'm just gonna have to block her because she's not. And I'm pretty sure if I looked hard enough, I would find her saying that same thing to me numerous times. So, like, these settlers don't get the oppression dynamics at all. Anyway, so thank you,
I have a
folks. Yep.
quick question for both of you. Do you guys have your reading list for next year ready, or have you thought about, like, am I losing it? Did I not?
Nope.
No reading list for next year? Are we like, because it's
Go ahead.
like, oh, like, I feel like it's getting close to the end of the year because Halloween stuff is out already. So I'm like, oh.
I am
And-
working on my reading list
Yeah.
for
Is that-
Settlers Book Club. Yeah.
'Cause I'd like to recommend Night Spirits. I know I've recommended it before, but it's a really good book.
What's it about?
It's about the Dene relocations. Just one particular tribe. It's just such an awesome book. It's not that long. It's a relatively small book. Somewhat easy read.
Night Spirits.
Yeah, Night Spirits. So it's a good book. So I think one of guests should do it.
Sure.
And like I
So-
said, it's short, so it would be good for a summer book because it's only like 150 pages or something like that.
Yeah, it looks like it's a Churchill, Manitoba's relocation. That's
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah, it's a good story. It's kind of, yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Well, I'll add it to my list then, and I'll put one out here for you tonight, and then, hope you join us for the next ones. I don't know if you like how we connected for the book club, but when I did send out the book club for this year, I did include for the next reading, there's like a YouTube video of the author saying the words so that you know how to say them. So
Oh.
I don't know if you all have that.
Yeah, no, I missed that one.
Okay, I'll just add your book here first, and then I'll send you this link, and I'll email you all three of you it, because I know I sent it with the original email, and so that way everybody would have it. I will add this book. Yeah, there's so many good books, so maybe that's what I'll just do from now on, is just put out the next year's book, or for like October of 2025, and and just do it that way, so that way like it's always there. So yeah, so we have Moon of the Turning Leaves, and he has a video of how to pronounce his words in his language. Then we have Code Talker by Chester Niz. Then we have Reflections on Allyship by Andrea Menard. And yeah, and then I'll put out another list for the next year, and we'll go from there. And maybe that's what I'll do, is I'll just say, next year's book club month will be this, and just keep adding to it, because I have a whole list of things for sure. And unfortunately they're more than 12 already. So it's hard, because it's like there's so many good books that come out that you want to read, and I don't always have the time to be able to do them all. So I'll send you guys an email, and we'll go from there.
Okay,
Thank you
sounds
so
good.
much.
Good.
Appreciate it.
Okay, folks, take care.
You take care.
Okay.
Everyone take care of yourselves.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.